Welcome to the Advantage Podcast, a monthly unscripted conversation with host David Ashcraft and top leaders impacting our world. Created by pastors for pastors to strengthen our leadership and expand our knowledge and influence.
Hey, well, I'm happy to have with me for the Advantage Podcast today, Shawn Williams. Shawn, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate it so much.
David, pleasure to be here. Great to be with everybody.
And for those of you that don't know Shawn is actually just the newly crowned, anointed, appointed, whichever word you want to use, new senior pastor at Willow Creek Community Church in Chicago. And so it's a privilege to have Shawn with us. And for those of you that don't know Shawn, tell us a little bit about your background so we have a feel for who you are. And then we'll talk about your experience at Willow over the last several years. But
Sure. Been in ministry about 3 years now. Cut my teeth in ministry coming out of Bible college. I went to grad school at Wheaton College out in the
Okay.
Chicagoland area, so it pulled me out
Sure.
to Chicagoland and got connected to a church called Community Christian Church. Lead pastor's Dave Ferguson, and they took a chance on a really green college student, honestly, and jumped into the student ministry there, and really fell in love with the church, fell in love with Dave and his leadership, the mission of the church, and really it captured my heart, and was able to serve God there for, gosh, almost 15 years. Was there, played a variety of roles there.
Yeah, and can I just say what a great experience for you to have there. I think the world of Dave and what they're doing there at Christian Community Church, and yeah, just very cool for you to be able to do that. And any takeaways that you'd say you learned most, or things that, or I guess it could be all, it just shaped you as a leader. But any takeaways from there?
Yeah, I mean, Dave's a world-class leader and a world-class human. He's just an amazing
Yeah,
guy.
he
And
is.
feel very, very fortunate to be a 22-year-old guy that got to learn leadership in that environment. Just feel
I'm
very
sure.
by that. But Dave's got a really high apostolic gifting. And so learned a lot about really what it looks like to start new things and
Mm,
to take new ground for the kingdom. And so we were really on the front end of the multi-site movement.
yeah.
And so this was back late 90s, early 2000s. And so I think when I got to the church, we were a church of 2 locations. When I left in 2015, we were a church of 13 locations. And
That's great.
so much just about how do you create an environment of reproduction really at every level. And
That's good.
um, yeah, very,
So
very.
I've had the opportunity. I've known Dave for a while, but we've connected more so in the last couple of years. And so, actually, one of our podcasts for the Advantage, Dave and I kind of did a debate on: is it church planting, is it multi-site, and the advantages, disadvantages of both. And we kind of landed on we're both after the same thing, and there's no right or wrong. Well, I think there is a right answer, but there's really no wrong answer. And so, yeah, so fun that you had that experience.
Oh, it's
So
great.
from CCC, where did you go from there?
Well, my brother-in-law is a guy by the name of Judd Wilhite, who leads a church called Central Church out in the Las Vegas area. And so he called me in the end of 2014 and said that he finally had a role that he felt like was a good fit for me. And so invited me to join him and the team out in Vegas. And candidly, just the opportunity to work with him. He's been a mentor for me for most of my life. And the opportunity to serve alongside of him and be with family was such a amazing opportunity. So I don't know that I would have left community for any other opportunity in the world, but
Yeah,
to
interesting.
go serve with family was a true gift. And so my wife and kids and I, we moved out to Vegas in 2015, and we're there through 2019. So almost 5 years in Vegas, and loved our time at the church. Central Church is an amazing church. Judd's an amazing leader. Learned a lot there. Vegas, come to
Quite
find
a
out,
different environment, I would think. So,
it's a very different environment, and I loved it in so many ways. I loved it from a ministry perspective. It was pretty hard on my family,
I would
and
think,
so
yeah.
finally made the decision to move back to the Midwest in 2019.
So, real quick, what was your role there at Central then?
I did 2 things. I was hired as the executive pastor of leadership development, which
Hmm.
candidly, David, I should have asked what that meant before I said yes to the role.
Yeah.
Uh, but I knew I was going to be a teaching pastor. I was going to do 15 to 18 weekends a year, and then
Okay.
I was going to help us with leadership development. When I got to Central, I reported to the executive pastor, and I asked him, "So, what do you mean by leadership development?" And he said, "We've always had in our heart to create a ministry training school, like a college level ministry training school." And so I had never done anything like that, but started rubbing shoulders with churches who had done works like that and learned a lot from what other people had done. And so we created our own kind of version of that and launched it maybe about a year after I got there. And it was really, really fun to see that take shape. And they're still running real strong today, doing great.
That's good. That's cool. Now, you said you came back into Chicago area 2019. Did
Yeah.
you know what you were going to come back to? And that had to be a hard decision. It sounds like from what you're saying, it was mainly for family and just the good of the family and things like that.
Yeah, it was all personally motivated. My wife's dad was pretty ill at the time, and we knew we didn't have a lot of time there. And my kids were not thriving, and so that was the other
Mhm.
piece. Just as a dad, feeling like needing to get my kids back into a space where they could thrive again. So when we moved back to Chicagoland, I didn't have a role. I was doing some church consulting, which some people do by calling. I was doing it because I had no other options really, and so.
Needed a job or an income. Huh?
I
Yeah.
needed something. And so I enjoyed it. I knew it wasn't the long play for me. It's not really my wiring. I'm really just a pastor at heart. And I knew I wanted to get back into the local church. At the time, I didn't know where, and I didn't want to take just any church job. I really wanted to wait for the right opportunity to come along. And I was prepared to do coaching as long as I needed to do coaching until that opportunity came.
So opportunity opens up at Willow. And you said you were waiting for the right opportunity, the right situation. So most people who may be aware of where Willow was at that time, it'd be like, okay, how in the world was that the right opportunity and the right time? And so what were you thinking when you stepped into that role?
I think really what it was less about Willow. Um, for me, there were two things that drove it. One was COVID had started and the church started shutting down. And as a consultant, I felt like I was on the sidelines at a
Mhm.
time that the church needed more frontline leadership. And it killed me that I was just on the sidelines. So
Mm.
that was a factor for me. And then the second factor at the time, Willow had just hired a new lead pastor in Dave Dummitt. And I've known Dave for a long, long time. And so when Dave called me and asked if I was crazy enough to jump in with him, it was less about Willow and it was more about doing ministry with Dave Dummitt
Huh.
and coming alongside of him and supporting him in any way that I possibly could to be a part of that next chapter at Willow. And so I don't know that I would have gone to Willow if it wasn't for the
Mm.
invitation of Dave.
Yeah. So can I go back on the coaching
Sure.
comments real quick there? So at least for you, and this isn't broad for everybody, but I would imagine all of us have times when we think, I'm frustrated with the church I'm in. I'm frustrated with all the stuff I'm dealing with. I think I ought to just go be a consultant. And that wasn't fulfilling enough for you. And so, was it really just more that desire to get back in the game? Is that
Yeah, I think it was for me. I actually did a life plan after I left Vegas before I came back to Chicago. And the person who did my life plan, we looked at these different options. He knew that coaching or consulting was an option. And he said to me, he says, I think this is your best option at the moment, but he goes, you're not going to last long there because you're a pastor. And at some
uh,
point, you're going to go be a pastor again. And I
yeah,
kind of shrugged it off at the time, David. I thought, maybe he's right. Maybe he's not. I think I can go give this consulting thing a good run. And I found myself again in COVID watching the church from somewhat of a distance um, walk through a really difficult leadership season and felt
mm,
like really thought I had something that could be helpful and it was sidelined. And for me, that was the most gut wrenching part of the
yeah,
process. I felt like I wanted to be a little bit closer to the field.
yeah. Okay. So, Sean, you came to Willow in 2020.
I did 2020, right after, let's see, June of 2020. So what we've been shut
Okay.
down for a couple months. So probably not
Did
the
you
most.
start talking? Did you start talking with Dave before COVID or once COVID hit?
Yeah, so he was in conversation with the elders probably February to March. When he started getting serious about taking the role, he reached out to me. And so I had my first conversations with him before I think he actually accepted the role.
Okay.
And so none of us saw what was about to take place and
Yeah. Yeah.
became a challenging leadership season for the entire church, right? But
Exactly.
you add on some of the dynamics we were facing in at Willow, it was quite a challenging start to the season.
I'm sure. So you guys kind of came as a package deal then, or at least Dave knew you were coming with him when he stepped in or likely to come in.
Yeah, he was, I think, a full month ahead of me. I think his first day was May the 1st of 2020, and I was June the 1st, 2020. So just
Okay.
right on his heels.
So can you describe a little bit what was the condition of Willow when you came in? And I will say real quick, Sean, on the side, whenever I travel, especially internationally, people constantly want to know how's Willow, and so I'll tell you later my response. I'd love to hear you talk about where Willow was in 2020 when you came. And I'll also say, just for everybody to know, I've had opportunity over the last year and a half to spend time with Sean and with Dave. Appreciate both of them very much. And Sean, appreciate you very much, and excited for you as you move into this new role of leading Willow in the future. But that's been a fun thing to get to know you and watch you step into this role. So describe a little bit 2020. What was the condition of Willow at that time? And don't feel like, so let me just back up just for you. Don't feel like you've got to say things that will potentially damage you as the new leader. So be aware of that. But as honestly as you can answer or want to answer, feel free.
I mean, Willow was in a post-crisis season is probably the best way to describe it. And so I assume that most of the people who are listening to this are aware of Willow's story. And regardless of what the cause was, and there's all kinds of different perspectives on the incidences that surrounded 2018. No matter what your perspective it is, everybody can be in the agreement of it created a crisis and
Yeah,
it created, quite a hardship as you had an outgoing leadership team, you have an outgoing eldership team, you had a staff that really was in a pretty unhealthy spot. And so when I arrived, if you looked at the top 25 leaders who were on staff in 2018, there was one of them still remaining.
wow,
And
wow,
so it created this leadership vacuum is probably the best way I know how to describe it. And there were a few people that stepped in an interim basis, and I hope that those people have massive jewels in their crown one day for leading in an interim season. That's a group of people that will not get any credit for what was a really hard thing for them to do. And so they held things together, but it was still in a post-crisis situation when we
sure.
arrived in 2020.
So how did you even know what steps to take? Because not only was it post-crisis, but it was, I would assume, a huge, huge void of trust in anybody in leadership. And let me go back. You mentioned all the people that left from a leadership standpoint. I was with you and the team a week ago, and I just asked for a show of hands of how many people had been around during that difficult time. I was amazed at how many people have been long term. So some people stuck with it for sure. So
For sure, for sure.
yeah,
And we actually call them, we term them legacy staff members, and there's a lot of them. And they are some of the most amazing people you'll ever be around. And you think about the journey of those legacy staff members and what they walked through, and
yeah,
just the fact that they've maintained a healthy relationship with Jesus,
yeah.
um, their own just even personal health, and still leading really strong and doing great work. And so, again, dozens and dozens and dozens of them still on staff with us.
Yeah, which is cool. So what does it mean to be post-crisis? What emotions were people feeling? Yeah, what does that mean?
It's a lot of what you described, and again, I think that we were facing this as a country in general, but there was a
Mhm.
lot of, mistrust. Like Dave's first weekend on staff was the weekend after George Floyd's murder, like his very first weekend that he's supposed to preach as the new pastor of Willow Creek Community Church, right? And so some of what we experienced, everybody was experiencing.
Yeah,
And there was
yeah,
a sense of a lot of confusion, a lot of tension, a lot of division that was just true of our country at that time. And then you just add the dynamics of what we had just been through as a church, and we experienced some of those things, I think, just to a magnified degree. And so the trust was really hard to be found. Division was really probably pretty deep in some places. A lot of people just hurting, and people don't make good decisions when they're hurting. They don't say
yeah.
appropriate things when they're hurting, and so you have a lot of that. We experienced a lot of that from our staff. We experienced a lot of that from the congregation, and so the whole adage of hurt people, and man, there was a lot of that flowing around.
Sure. Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, if everybody will just think back to 2020 and those moments you're talking about that all of us faced, but then add to it everything that Willow had just gone through and was still experiencing, and just a tough, tough situation to step into. So, how did you guys even know where to start, and where did you start?
Gosh, I wish that there would have been some sort of manual that we could have followed, David. I don't know that we knew what we were doing if I'm really candid. Looking back, I think we made some really good decisions early on. And I think we made some ones that if we had the chance to go and redo, we would certainly take that opportunity today. But there were a few things that we knew that were massive problems that had to be addressed immediately. And so a few things we knew. I knew in my interview process that Willow was still, I'd say, grossly overstaffed. Part of that was, over the years between 2018 and 2020, the attendance of the church had dropped, giving had dropped, but the church staff had not been right sized to the new
Mm.
realities. And part of that is because the interim leadership didn't want the responsibility to make those decisions because they weren't the ones that were going to set the vision for where you're going. And so how do you make those decisions not knowing where you're going? So I don't
Yeah.
fault the interim leadership for not making those decisions. But when my very first day on staff at Willow Creek, I furloughed 100 people that I had not met, that I didn't know who they were, but you're just looking at positions and having to make these decisions. And so we knew that we had to make a massive right sizing of our staff, and we didn't have a lot of time to come in and make friends and build trust because the financial picture was so poor that we had to make those decisions really quickly. And so we ended up really in those first probably 6 to 12 months reducing our staff size by about 50%. And I would not wish that on my worst enemy, David.
So
That
50% is how many? Like you said just a minute ago, 100 people, you said your first day or so?
Yeah, so we went from a staff size of 500 to a staff size of probably 250-ish within the first 12 months. And then we actually did another probably 10% from that about 6 months after that. So in total is a probably 60% reduction. Um,
And and for those of us that have led and had to let people go, it's not ever just the person, it's their family, it's their friends, it's extended, because most of those people have probably been around Willow for a pretty good while. And so it's groups of people that you end up making unhappy with every one of those decisions. So,
for sure. For
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
And, we're in a situation that you're also not in a position that you know who the players are. And so one of the things that we did early that I look back to as a really good decision is we were going to make decisions with very little information, and we knew that. But the question was, how do we get as much information as we possibly can? And so we made the decision early on that we would meet with every single person on the staff team. And I think I had at the time about 250 people rolling to me. And so I set up 15-minute meetings back to back to back. I think it took me about 2 weeks to do it. And it was the most emotionally draining thing I think I've ever done.
Because they
And
knew why they were coming in, right?
they did. Like we had set them up that we let our staff know that these were the decisions that we're going to need to make. We had them prepare on their end that they showed up to those meetings with some prompts that we'd given them. We also created an opt out because we felt like there were some people
Choose to go on their own.
they needed to go and they
Yeah.
knew it. And so if we give them a little bit of parachute, they would opt out on their own. And so some of it was that it was their own decision making in it. They
Yeah.
knew where we were now headed as a church. They were trying to decide, do I want to be a part of that future? Can I navigate this change that's ahead? Do I trust these new leaders? So there's some decision making on their own part. And then from our perspective, I was looking for really three things. I wanted to know, can I trust this person? And it's a little bit of like the Malcolm Gladwell blink that you're making this blink decision of, can I trust them? The second one is, did I think they could make the change from where we have been to where we were going? And maybe the third piece is, do I think they're healthy enough to do it? And so again, I have 15-minute meetings. You're trying to
Speed dating there, aren't you?
trying to
Yeah.
get as much information as you possibly can to make the most informed decision you can, and you realize you're not holding all the chips. Like I'm making
Yeah.
some really hard decisions affecting a lot of people with very little information. And I think looking back on it, David, we got some of the decisions right. We got some of the decisions wrong. There were people we kept that we probably should have um, invited into a new opportunity elsewhere, right? There were also people that we lost that we should have fought harder to keep. And then there were people we kept and we put them in the wrong seat, right? And
Yeah.
so there were a lot of decisions that we made. And again, I don't know what the percentage is that we got right, but we definitely had to do a course correction probably 6 to 12 months later that finally allowed us to stabilize the direction we were headed.
Yeah. Wow. So where was the board in all this? Were they supportive of you? And where was the congregation? Were they supportive or were they mad at you from the beginning?
But probably both and. The board was very supportive. Like the board knew that these changes needed to happen. For us, we were also changing our model of ministry. The Willow at the time had 7 locations. All the locations were pretty autonomous in how they functioned.
Yeah.
And the elders really wanted us to bring those locations back together in a more aligned central model. And so all the shift was happening at the same time. We shifted the model so that when we made the staffing decisions, we're populating the new reality. And so
Yeah.
the board was behind it. The board actually commissioned us to do that work. And so I always
Did
felt
you
like
know that was going to be part of it coming in?
I did know that the staff reduction was a part of what was ahead. I don't
And
know that
did you know the multi-sites were going to change models
I
when you came
did.
in? Okay. All right.
Did. So I was hired into the new reality, and I was
Yeah.
probably the first one hired into the new reality. And so I was one of the very few people who didn't experience a massive job change.
Okay.
And so everybody else experienced a massive, massive job change. But we definitely had the support of the board through it all. And we had some staff support. Some of the staff, like right out of the gates, were so supportive, gave us trust when we hadn't earned it. Um,
Because they didn't know you guys from
they
Adam,
did.
really. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard Groeschel say one time that he said sometimes trust can be given and distrust is earned. And I think that's, a fascinating perspective because a lot of times we think about trust has to be earned. And we hadn't earned it yet. And some people chose to give it to us
Mm.
anyway. And that helped us go so much further faster with that group of people who were willing to, I think, take a risk on us at some level. And then I'd say there's a percentage of the congregation that gave us the same, that extended trust to us when we had not yet earned it. And there's a percentage of the staff and congregation that was the opposite. And so you felt like you had some pretty serious headwinds and you're swimming upstream. And so you have a little bit of both. Maybe maybe a lot more of the opposing voices early, but over the course of time, those became less and less.
So, Sean, and again, feel free to share details or not. You mentioned that the attendance had dropped way before you guys came in. And so my guess was Willow at 25,000 or so at its high point before
That's
everything happened. Is
about
that kind of where they were? I- Are you comfortable sharing how low it got? And don't feel like you have to.
Oh, I mean, we can. The challenge again because of COVID,
You
we
didn't know.
we didn't know, and so we were
Yeah.
making a best educated guess as we could, but we didn't really know. We were one of the last churches to reopen, and a lot of people thought that was a political statement by us. The truth is, we were making so many changes. I don't know that we could have done church at 7 locations, and so
It almost worked better not to have. Yeah.
part of the
Interesting.
reason we stayed closed as long as we did, we blamed it on COVID, but we were really trying to put the right pieces in play to be able to do ministry effectively at 7 places. And so we stayed closed almost a year, which is
Wow.
way, way, way long. And
Wow.
frankly, that hurt us too, that we stayed closed that long. So when we reopened, I think we reopened at about 3,500, 3,700
So
across
we're
all.
showing up on the weekends. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And
And
then today we're probably in the 10 to 10,500, give or take. So we've come a long way in
come a
5 years.
long way. That's a huge group. Yeah.
Uh,
It's cool.
man, when we reopened, it was slim.
But that was true for all of us. I remember the first time we opened, Sean, and it was only 3 months later, but still people were coming back at a trickle. And so and what's funny, the blessing of that was every weekend there were more, and so every weekend you felt like you were doing something significant when it was really just people coming back. And I remember our auditorium seats 2,400, and we had gone from maybe 300 people showing up to maybe 2 months later 500 people showing up, and the team's like, "We're gonna have to add chairs." And it's like, we don't have to add chairs. We got 2,000 more to go before we had chairs. But it gave you a sense of excitement that something was happening. So yeah.
Or
Yeah, amazing. And you guys didn't even have opportunity to know then if people were leaving because they were mad at you or they didn't come back. I mean, you just didn't know. So it's not like there was this new wave of people that left because you were shut down and you didn't know what was happening.
right, right. And candidly, I think that some people left because we were not reopened and they went to another church who
Yeah,
had to come back up. And so there was definitely a lot of movement in that season.
I'm sure. And finances stayed adequate during that time?
No, I mean, we were I mean, we were nosediving financially,
Mm,
for sure when we arrived in 2020, but we were in a steady decline for the next few years. What's interesting is even prior to the crisis, you can go all the way back to 2017. Willow had declined in giving every year since
okay.
2017.
Wow.
We didn't bottom out actually until last year, 2024,
Okay.
was the
Okay.
first year we saw finally an uptick. I think there's a few reasons behind that, David. I think one of them is giving tends to be a lagging metric, that even
Mhm.
though our attendance was now growing again, we were growing by new people coming to the church that didn't have a previous church affiliation, which means we were reaching the people we were hoping to reach, which is awesome. However, they just hadn't been discipled in their giving. And so we were losing people, even if they were fewer in number, we were losing people who were giving at a greater capacity than
Yeah.
those who were coming in. And so we saw our attendance numbers really trend up from maybe year 2 or 3, but we didn't see our giving numbers change until year 4 or 5.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's interesting. So along the way, so you're a year into this, you open again, you see how many people come back. Did the board stay behind you guys all the way through? Was it ever tense with the board of them saying, "Ooh, we might have misstepped here"? And did you and Dave, were you guys as a team be able to stay close and all of that? Now I'm starting to ask you some real private questions.
No,
So
it's
again,
really fine. I don't know that I'm gonna be able to speak to the board questions as much, just because I wasn't the senior pastor at the
yeah,
time.
okay,
So
all right,
if you were asking Dave those same questions, he might give you a very different answer. And
yeah,
so,
yeah.
do I think that there were times where there was some tenseness? For sure.
And there were on all of our boards, so, I mean, that's not all
Yeah.
that different, so, yeah.
And so I would imagine that's absolutely true. Anytime you have a board where, not just any board, you have people who are leaving the church for whatever reason, and they are friends with people on the board. Board members hate to see their friends leaving the church.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
sometimes they'll even take that personally, and if you're not careful, that will turn their hearts, against the staff or maybe the senior pastor. So we didn't experience that in an extreme way, but no doubt were there dynamics like that at play along the way, for sure. But to the board's credit, they knew that we were undergoing some necessary and difficult change, and they were giving Dave and the rest of us the margin to be able to facilitate that change. Our board is on a basically 3-year rotation. So Dave's year 3 into year 4, he had an entirely different board
Is
than
that
I.
right? Okay, wow.
So the dynamics definitely shifted, along the
Yeah,
way. Probably some positively, maybe some that created some tension, but that's something that Dave's navigated, and again, he would know the details far more than I would.
yeah, yeah, okay, wow. I can't imagine all that you guys are experiencing on top of what was just natural because of what was going on in our country racially, COVID, all those things, so very challenging. Did you ever feel like in the last 5 years, or at what point in the last 5 years did you guys start thinking, "Okay, we've got this ship turned, we're moving in a good direction." Was that long time still coming, or is there a point you go, "Okay, I think we're gonna make it here"?
I remember specifically there was a moment we were at a lead team retreat, which we did probably 2, 3 times a year. This was probably in year 3 is my guess. And we were at this lead team retreat, and I said out loud, "This is the first retreat that we've had that we haven't exclusively been focused on a crisis. We're finally looking ahead. We're finally dreaming again." And it was not that everything had shifted, but just that fact itself felt like the wind shifted a little bit for us.
Yeah,
And it's not like we had strong momentum necessarily, but it felt like the wind was at least neutral, if not maybe slightly to our back. And it just felt altogether different than where we started.
yeah, and it's a great thing to start feeling that way, it's noticeable, isn't it?
Oh,
Yeah.
game changing.
Yeah. So, you know what I think I'm going to do, Sean? I'm going to break this into two different conversations and we'll keep talking. But because I would love for you to talk a little bit about how, from a vision philosophy standpoint of ministry, I'd love to talk to you about that. But we're kind of into the weeds right now. So let me ask you a couple more weed questions if I can, and then we'll move to the next phase. Um, so, you're taking arrows, you and Dave. I know you are, because, and I think we all know it because we either would see it or hear it. So, how did you and Dave hang in there during this time, and how did it impact your families? Because it had to impact your families.
I think what's interesting for me, David, is earlier on, It was definitely harsher criticism, but easier for me to receive. And the reason for that for me was I knew it had nothing to do with me
Yeah.
because they didn't know me, and
Yeah.
it wasn't about me. I just became the new face that was in a leadership position that they didn't trust. And
Yeah.
so whether it was a staff member or whether it's a congregant, I mean, I can't tell you how many rooms I was in that people would stand up and start yelling at you. And I'm like, I'm not sure what I said that's I mean, I know I stepped on a landmine. I'm not sure what I did to step on the landmine. I'm not sure what I did to trigger what's happening at the moment. But I also knew it had nothing to do with me. And so
Yeah.
early on, I actually felt like I could distance myself from it in a
Yeah.
healthy way. Now, at the same time, when I say it's not about me, I also knew that I was 100% responsible for it. It's one of those things that I may not have caused it, but I'm now 100% responsible for it. And so it's not in any way being negligent to what was happening. I just didn't take it personally. I feel like I could go home and sleep well and come back and show up with a smile on my face the next day and just keep leading in the way I thought was best. What's fascinating is as time progressed. So go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what's interesting with that, Sean, so I experienced that when I first came to LCBC, but it was a fraction of what you guys were dealing with. We had 150 people, and it was rocky, but I didn't know the people, so I was okay with that. But what was different is I wouldn't feel it, but my wife Ruth would,
Mm.
and so she's much more sensitive than I am and caring and kind and all of those good things. And so she would feel it much more. She would hear the comments said, or she'd tell me, "You don't have to run into these people in the grocery store." So I was dealing with that with 150 people. You're dealing with that with 4 and 5 and 6 and 7,000 people. So how did it affect your wife and your family and all this?
I think for the most part, Lindsay will take her cues from me. And I don't want to say Lindsay was unaffected, but she wasn't. We've been in other ministry seasons that she's been affected a lot more than we
Okay.
were in that season. Um, I'm also probably a little cautious as far as what I share with Lindsay. I won't
Yeah.
share with her some of the really, really hard stuff because it's not something that I want her to carry. And I also think that there's been moments for me in ministry, David, that I've shared those types of things with her. I ended up getting resolution at somewhere along the way,
Yeah. And you
but
forget to
she
bring her
doesn't.
back up to speed.
Yeah, she doesn't have the
Yeah.
ability to do that. And so I'm cautious to share with her the really, really harsh critical stuff because it's generally not helpful for her. There was an article written about me. I don't know. I'd probably been at Willow for 9 months to a year. Somebody had asked a question in a Q&A, something regarding Bill. I responded to the question, and there were some bloggers and some article writers that wanted to express their opinion about it. And she obviously heard a win about that. That impacted her probably more than anything because we'd never been in a ministry role that the Christianity Today cares about what Shawn Williams is doing, and
Right.
so
Right.
that was the moment that we both realized that we're now in a very different environment, and
Yeah.
the number of eyes and the level of scrutiny related to this environment is unique. And so it was a learning lesson for me in that. It was a learning lesson, I think, for her in that. But really, by and large, we navigated it in a pretty healthy way. I also think, David, I had a year where I was doing consulting, and so I would say I walked back into Willow with very fresh legs,
Mm.
where a lot of people felt like they just run a ministry marathon, and
Right.
I felt like I had pretty fresh legs, and so that also probably allowed me to um, maybe take it at a higher degree or remain healthy a little bit longer. For me, it actually became harder the longer we were there.
Mm.
Criticism wasn't as strong. It
Mhm.
certainly wasn't as volatile. But at some point you realize, no, they actually are angry with me. It's no longer about what
You
somebody else
can't
did.
blame it on somebody else, so,
At some
yeah,
point, that was my decision, or
yeah,
that was a leadership move that I made. And so uh, the criticism that gets really personal, that will impact me. And
yeah,
so, but
and,
that was
I was thinking, Sean, maybe COVID in some ways did you guys a favor because it allowed you to stay, not as visible in the community, or for sure Lindsay, where people didn't know her, see her, and if they saw her, they didn't know who she was, and so that might have actually been a blessing in disguise too, but,
yeah,
yeah, well, I'm glad your family came through this. I'm assuming I'm speaking for you. I'm glad they came through this in a healthy way, and they can be excited about the future as well.
for sure, for sure. No, we're doing
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, good. So real quick, the transition between you and Dave seems like it's been very healthy from what I've seen, and it's something that's been talked about for a while. So it's not one of these surprise, oh no, somebody left, what's wrong? But it's one that was planned and orchestrated, I think, well. And so, any descriptions you can give of that experience, and then I think what we'll do is we'll pause and jump into more philosophy conversation. But
Great, great. Yeah, you know, the conversation with Dave actually started a little while ago as he was just prayerfully considering what was next for him. And I don't want to share Dave's story. I'll let Dave share his own
sure,
story
yeah,
at
that's
some
good.
point in the journey. But at some point, he just came to the realization that he didn't think that God was calling him to be at Willow another 5, 10, 15 years. That he felt very clear about what God was calling to Willow to do. And by God's grace, he was able to really help us through a really hard season and get us stabilized and get us healthy again. And he's done a masterful job at that. Like,
Yeah,
we will always be indebted to what Dave and his leadership
yes,
provided for us over the last 5 years. But he got to a point where he goes, I don't know that this is going to be the story that I want for the next 5, 10, 15 years. There's some other things that I'd like to do. And so he and I started that conversation a little while back, and very grateful just for his investment in me, his belief in me. And when he finally got to the place that he wanted to communicate the desire to transition to the elders, um, he encouraged them to take a hard look at me. And so we went through quite the process of them vetting to decide whether I would be the next senior pastor of Willow. But Dave was my number one supporter every step of the way, and still is. And so
that's
I
cool.
couldn't be more grateful for his leadership in my life personally, but also just at the church as a whole.
Yeah, that's cool. I know, again, I had opportunity to be with your team, your staff a couple weeks ago, after the transition was announced. And again, I'm very excited for you and what's going to be happening in the future for you and for Willow. But it also made me just very aware of the fact that had Dave not been the leader that he is, and had he not done some of the things that he needed to do to help Willow turn around, there's a good chance Willow wouldn't even be here today. And
Real.
there were people cheering against you and against Dave and what you guys were doing. So, to your point, Dave definitely made a difference at Willow. If you go off of Jim Collins's, if is it going to be better or worse when you leave? And in his case, Willow is definitely better than when he came in, and shows strength and leadership there. So appreciate very much Dave and his history, and taken a lot of shots to turn Willow around, but definitely has done that. So exciting to hear that.
Yeah, yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and people have responded well to you since the announcement.
Yeah, as far as I know. I mean, my joke with my wife, David, is that, like, I don't know that I would know because they probably wouldn't tell me, but everybody's been really, really positive. The staff has been so encouraging. The elders have been a huge support. Congregation feels very well received. So it all feels really, really positive, and very, very grateful for that.
The ones that like you are telling you they're excited. Those that don't, you'll find that out later. So yeah,
Right.
my experience with you there at Willow is you've definitely endeared yourself to the people around South Barrington, and so I think it's going to be a great run. So
I appreciate that.
Thank you for listening to the Advantage Podcast. This has been part one of our conversation with Shawn Williams, Senior Pastor of Willow Creek Community Church. Be sure and listen to episode 18 for part two, as Shawn discusses the vision and philosophical standpoint of ministry during his first 5 years at Willow Creek. If you found this discussion helpful, feel free to pass it along. To find out more about the work of The Advantage, visit our website at theadvantage.org.